My dad called and said, "Don't bring your wife and kids to my retirement party. I just want everything to be perfect." So I responded, "Then you shouldn't have put yourself in such an ugly situation. I'm 34 male, and for most of my life I thought I had a pretty normal family. Solid house in the suburbs, wife who's out of my league, a little girl who thinks I hung the moon. Life was smooth right up until the afternoon I stood in my father's driveway and watched two uniformed movers carry his refrigerator out the front door, while 40 of his retirement guests just stood there holding little plates of cake. Nobody was eating, nobody was talking, and my dad was sitting on the front steps of a house that was emptier than the day he bought it, staring at me like he didn't recognize his own son. But I'm getting way ahead of myself. Let me back up and paint you the whole picture, because you're going to want to understand exactly how we got here. My wife is Becca, an ER nurse, and honestly the most level-headed person I've ever met. Our daughter Sadie just turned 7, and she's got more questions per minute than a courtroom lawyer. I work as a commercial electrician, decent money, nothing flashy, but we're comfortable and we're happy. That was the life. Now let me introduce you to the people who tried to set it on fire. My dad, Warren, is basically the CEO of appearances. Everything has to look a certain way, and disagreeing with him is like arguing with a vending machine that already ate your money. 38 years he worked at the same manufacturing plant, climbed his way to floor manager, and somewhere along the way he decided that image was the only thing that mattered. My mom, Renata, is the quiet one. Head down, keeps the peace, goes along with whatever Warren decides. For as long as I've been alive, I've never once seen her push back. Then there's my little brother, Colton, 22, 12 years younger than me, and the golden child since the second he was born. And I mean golden. That kid has never heard the word no from either of our parents. Oh, and I can't leave out my cousin Sloan, 28, who works in marketing, has absolutely zero filter, and calls family drama exactly the way she sees it. Sadie adores her because Sloan treats her like a tiny adult instead of just a kid you talk down to. Years ago, when I first tried to explain my family to Sloan, her response was classic. "So your dad's obsessed with looking perfect, your mom's been on mute for 3 decades, and your brother's a spoiled little prince who's never had a consequence in his life. Cool. Sounds like a slow-motion car crash I get front row seats to." Here's the thing though. Growing up, I was never bitter about Colton getting the royal treatment. He was 12 years younger. Made sense he got the extra attention, the extra spoiling, all of it. I actually loved being a big brother, loved having this little guy to look out for. Call me an idiot, but I genuinely believed all that big brother energy would come full circle, that my parents would love my kid the same way I loved my brother. That was the assumption everything fell apart on. The whole thing kicked off about a week before Dad's retirement party. He calls me up, sounding more excited than I'd heard him in years, going on about this big celebration he wanted. Coworkers, relatives, neighbors, old friends from the plant, the whole 9 yards, and I'm thinking, this is great. My old man's finally slowing down, family coming together, all of it. So without even blinking, I offered to throw in $900 to help make the night special. Dad got all choked up thanking me, telling me to make sure we came early so we could all be together before the guests arrived. It felt good. It felt like the kind of moment you save up for. Sadie was over the moon. She spent that entire week making Grandpa Warren a handmade retirement card. Crooked crayon letters that said, "Happy Retirement, Grandpa." Little suns and flowers she colored in herself, the whole front covered in glitter she absolutely was not supposed to have gotten into. The whole time she worked on it, she kept telling me and Becca that we were only allowed to give advice, no touching, because she was doing it all herself. Watching my 7-year-old sit at the kitchen table for an hour every night, pouring her whole heart into this thing for her grandfather, man, it got me right in the chest. I kept picturing Dad's face when he opened it, picturing Sadie beaming when he scooped her up and told her it was the most beautiful card he'd ever seen. In my head, that was going to be one of those perfect memories you hold on to forever. Then my phone buzzed with a text that changed everything. I was up on a ladder wiring a panel in this half-finished office building when Dad's name popped up on my screen. Figured it was party details, maybe asking us to bring ice or extra chairs. Instead I read, "Don't come. Colton's bringing his girlfriend and doesn't want Sadie or Becca there. Too much drama potential." I read it 3 times. My hand actually started shaking on the ladder rail. My own father had just texted me, like I was some stranger, to tell me my 7-year-old daughter and my wife were not welcome at his retirement party because my little brother didn't want them there. No phone call, no conversation, just a cold text dropping a bomb on my whole family while I was standing 30 feet in the air. I climbed down and called him immediately. Rang twice and went straight to voicemail. Called again. Same thing. He was screening me. That's when I knew this wasn't some clumsy misunderstanding or a text that came out wrong. This was a decision he'd already made and didn't want to defend out loud. I called Sloan Sloan because I needed someone to keep me from doing something I couldn't take back. The second I told her, she went quiet, then said, "Let me make sure I've got this right. Uncle Warren banned a 7-year-old and your wife from a party because Prince Colton and his brand new girlfriend might feel a little crowded. That's not a retirement party, cuz. That's a hostage situation with a cake." I sat down on a stack of drywall and just breathed for a minute, and it hit me that this wasn't really about a party at all. This was about respect, about who counted as family, and who was an inconvenience to be quietly deleted, and they'd picked the wrong 2 people to delete. I couldn't focus on a single thing after that. My kid had been talking about this party for a week straight, asking what kind of cake Grandpa would have, whether there'd be other kids to play with. Around lunch, I told my foreman I had a family emergency and needed the afternoon, which wasn't even a lie. I drove the 40 minutes to my parents' house with my knuckles white on the wheel the whole way. Why would he do this? How is a 7-year-old and a nurse such a threat that they've got to be banned from their own grandfather's retirement? Before I pulled in, I texted Sloan what I was walking into. Her reply, "Oh, this is going to be legendary. Warren's about to find out retirement doesn't mean early." I pulled into the driveway around 2 in the afternoon, and I could see him straight through the front window, kicked back in his recliner, watching golf like he hadn't just detonated our entire family over text message. The nerve of it made my vision go a little white at the edges. Soon as I walked in, he looked more annoyed than anything. "Why are you here? Shouldn't you be at work?" "I've got 100 things to do before tomorrow." I didn't bother with hello. "What exactly did you just text me?" He got that look. You know the one, where he's already decided he did nothing wrong. "I was just giving you a heads up that Colton's bringing his girlfriend and we can't have Sadie running around screaming or Becca being, well, being what, Dad? Why aren't my wife and daughter allowed at your retirement party?" And the reason he gave me, I swear, was worse than the ban itself. He said Sadie was too wild and Becca was too blunt, that she might say something in front of important people that would embarrass him. This was supposed to be a classy evening, he said. He didn't want any scenes. That's when Colton strolled in from the kitchen with a protein shake, and I could tell he'd been standing there eavesdropping the whole time. He looked at me with this smug little grin and actually started listing Sadie's supposed crimes. Too loud, interrupts grown-ups, asks too many questions at the table, knocked over a glass of juice on the good rug last Thanksgiving, which, for the record, she was 7 and she said sorry a dozen times. And Becca always has some opinion about everything, he added, like he was reading charges off a clipboard he'd been building for months. I don't want Nadia thinking our family is trash. This night is a big deal for me, too. I stood there listening to my little brother, a grown man who has never once paid for a meal I was at the table for, describe my daughter like she was a stain he was trying to keep off camera. And the worst part was my father standing right next to him, nodding along, like this was a reasonable and mature conversation 2 adults were having about a child. "Dad," I said, "do you hear yourself? You are talking about a 7-year-old like she's a liability on a spreadsheet." Warren just shrugged and said, "Image matters, son. Whether you like it or not, and one loud kid can undo a whole evening." That was the sentence that told me everything I needed to know about the man I'd spent 34 years trying to make proud. One loud kid. That's what my daughter was to him, not a granddaughter. A variable that might ruin his lighting. This is the same kid whose college tuition I have personally been covering for 2 years. The same brother I bought groceries for when he cried to me about being broke. And there he stood, talking about my wife and my daughter like they were a liability on his personal brand. Later that night, I called Sloan to vent about the whole thing, and when I got to the part about Becca being too blunt, she completely lost it. Too blunt. That's rich, coming from a household where the family motto is smile and pretend. What's Becca going to do? Accidentally say something true at the dinner table? Somebody call the manners police? Standing in that living room, I looked at Colton and asked him flat out, "So you think my kid's a menace and my wife's an embarrassment? You want to talk about wild? Do you remember what you were like at 7? He rolled his eyes and snapped that it was completely different, that this was an important night, and he needed everything to be perfect for Nadia. The entitlement coming off him was unreal, like he was briefing me on a corporate event instead of a family party. And that's when my mom walked in from the hallway. Renata, who I have never in my life seen raise her voice. Quiet, Mom. Head down, Mom. She stood there in the doorway and something in her face was different. She looked straight at my father with an expression I'd never seen her wear and she said, "What is wrong with you?" Warren looked like the recliner had talked back to him. "Renata, stay out of this." But she didn't. 36 years of staying out of it, and she picked that exact moment to be done. "How can you ban your own granddaughter and your daughter-in-law from a family party?" she said, her voice getting harder with every word. Then she turned and looked at Colton, and she started listing things. The time he threw a chair through the sliding glass door at 9 because he lost a video game. The time he took her car at 16 with no license license and put it in a ditch. How he screamed and cried at every holiday until someone handed him whatever he wanted. But did we ever ban you from anything? She asked him. Did we ever once call you an embarrassment? Colton just stood there with his jaw hanging, mumbling that it wasn't the same, that it was totally different. Mom wasn't finished. She told my father that if he didn't apologize to my family right then and put us back on the guest list, she wasn't going to his retirement either. And that's when Warren finally exploded. He started roaring about how ungrateful all of us were, how he'd given 38 years of his life to that plant and deserved to have his one night exactly the way he pictured it. If I don't want certain people there causing scenes, that's my right, he shouted. But my mom didn't flinch. She just looked at him, calm now, and said she'd spent 3 decades watching him treat people like props in a photo of a life he wanted strangers to admire. I'm done pretending, she said. I don't even know who you are anymore. I stood there watching my parents go at each other for the first time in my entire life, and it landed on me like a truck. This wasn't about a party. This was about years and years of quiet damage that my mom had been swallowing to keep the peace. When I was heading for the door, completely done, Mom followed me out to the driveway. She grabbed my arm and said something I'm never going to forget. You don't have to keep taking this. Stand up for your family, honey. Somebody in this family finally should. That drive home was where I made up my mind. I wasn't going to be the bigger person. I wasn't going to quietly swallow this like everyone had trained me to. If my dad and my brother wanted to treat my wife and my kid like they were disposable, then they were about to learn exactly how disposable their whole comfortable setup was without me holding it up. The whole ride back, my mind was going 100 miles an hour. The disrespect, the way he talked about banning my daughter like he was trimming a guest list at a wedding he was too good for. I kept thinking about every check I'd written for those people. Every time I dropped everything because Dad said he needed a hand or Colton called broke. I thought about how I'd stood at that plant's family day years ago, so proud to point at my father and tell my co-workers that's my old man. And I thought about my daughter at the kitchen table, tongue poking out of the corner of her mouth, gluing down another crooked paper flower for a grandpa who'd already decided she wasn't worth the risk. Somewhere on that highway, the hurt burned off and left something a lot colder and a lot more useful behind it. I wasn't going to beg to be let back into a party I was paying for. I wasn't going to write a long emotional message he'd screenshot to Colton and laugh at. By the time I pulled into my own driveway, I'd made a decision that was going to blow the entire thing wide open. See, here's what nobody tells you about family. Sometimes being the bigger person is just a nice word for letting people walk on you forever. Sometimes the only language a control freak understands is consequences. I walked in and Becca was at the table helping Sadie with a worksheet, and my little girl looked up at me with this huge grin and asked if I was excited for Grandpa's party tomorrow. Seeing that pure excitement on her face, knowing exactly what my dad and my brother had said about her and her mom, that was the moment it all locked into place. After Sadie went to bed, I sat Becca down and told her everything. I watched her face go from confused to hurt to a kind of cold anger I'd only seen once or twice. They banned both of us, she said, her voice climbing. Over what? What did a 7-year-old ever do to them? I told her the plan. Tomorrow, take Sadie to that new trampoline park across town. Don't say a single word about Grandpa's retirement. Just give her a fun day. She asked what I was going to be doing while they bounced around, and I looked her dead in the eye and told her the truth. I'm going to go get back everything that's mine. I called Sloan the second Becca went to tuck Sadie in, and when I laid out what I was thinking, she started cackling. Cuz, are you telling me you're about to repossess your own father on his retirement day in front of his co-workers? She said, this is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. Warren is about to learn that karma does not send a save the date. That night I locked myself in my office and started building a list. Not a to-do list, an inventory. Every single thing I had bought for my parents over the last 7 years. I pulled bank statements, order confirmations, warranty registrations, credit card records, all of it. You want to know how much money I had poured into the people who just told me my wife and kid weren't good enough to stand in their living room? $47,000. 47 grand out of a normal middle-class paycheck, spread across 7 years of trying to be a good son. I started with the big stuff, the $2,300 Samsung refrigerator when their old one died right before a holiday, the $800 washer when Mom mentioned hers was leaking, the $2,000 sectional because Dad kept complaining the old couch hurt his back, the 65-inch TV I bought so he could watch his golf in what he called proper resolution. And I didn't just buy the TV, I paid a guy to mount it and I covered every streaming service they use. But the real gut punch was Colton's tuition. $19,000 over 2 years so my little brother wouldn't have to work a part-time job and could, quote, focus on himself. himself. I started covering it after he showed up at my house nearly in tears about student loans. I offered to loan it to him with 0 interest, and Becca, being a better person than me, told me to just gift it so he wouldn't feel like he owed anybody. Big brother looking out. Then all the smaller stuff on top. The dining table everyone ate holidays at. Their bed frame. The microwave. The coffee maker. The good knives. The patio set Dad grilled on every summer. Colton's laptop. Colton's phone the year his got stolen. Random cash every time he was, quote, tight this month. There was a line in my banking history where I'd literally covered their water bill one winter so it wouldn't get shut off, and Dad had never mentioned it to a single person because it didn't fit the story he liked to tell about being a self-made man. I texted the running total to Sloan just to have someone witness it, and she wrote back, "So let me get this straight. You funded the entire set of the movie your dad's been starring in, and now he's kicking the crew off the lot. Yeah, take the whole set with you, cuz." I sat there staring at the list and realized that almost everything in that house, everything Dad was about to show off to his coworkers tomorrow, had been paid for by the son he'd just banned, and they had the nerve to call my family an embarrassment. So I found a used furniture pickup service online, one of those outfits that buys decent secondhand pieces and flips them. I called the after-hours line, told the guy I had a full house of furniture and appliances I needed gone fast, and he was more than happy to help. I booked them for the next morning at 11 a.m. sharp, right in the dead center of my father's precious retirement party. The plan was stupid simple. Show up mid-party with the crew and reclaim every single item I had a receipt for. Everything was in my name. Every purchase, every transfer, every warranty. Legally, it was still my property that I'd just been letting them borrow. When I texted Sloan the final details, her response nearly killed me. "This is better than any show streaming right now. You're about to turn Warren's retirement into a live episode of Repo Day. I am devastated I won't be there to see Colton's face when the couch walks out the door. Was it petty? Maybe. Was it justified? Absolutely. I stayed up until 2 in the morning getting everything ready. The service address, printed copies of every receipt, a room-by-room list of what came out and what stayed. This was not how I ever pictured things going with my dad, but he made the call. He picked his perfect party over his own granddaughter, and now he was going to find out what that choice actually cost. The last thing I did before bed was walk past Sadie's room, where her handmade card was sitting on the dresser, glitter and all, ready to be handed to a grandfather who'd just erased her from his life over a text. Tomorrow, my dad was going to learn exactly what happens when you come after my family. The morning of the party, Becca took Sadie to the trampoline park, exactly like we planned. My kid was buzzing about the foam pit and the dodgeball court, completely clueless about the storm rolling in behind her. At 11 a.m. on the dot, I pulled up to my parents' house in a white box truck with 2 movers from the pickup service. Uniforms, dollies, moving blankets, the whole professional setup, and the scene was perfect. Soft acoustic music drifting out the open windows. Maybe 40 guests scattered across the yard and the living room. Balloons in the plants' colors. A big printed banner strung across the porch that said, "Congratulations, Warren, 38 years of excellence." A folding table out front covered in a white cloth, stacked with wrapped gifts and cards from people who thought they were celebrating a good man. Somebody had even set up a little slideshow on a laptop by the door. Photos of my dad through the decades, and I noticed not one single picture of me or Sadie or Becca made the cut. 38 years of excellence, and his own son and granddaughter had been edited out of the highlight reel. That told me this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision he'd made in a bad mood. He'd been curating us out for a while. As I walked up the driveway, a couple of relatives lit up and started with the warm hellos. "Grant, so glad you could make it after all," one of them said. And that's when Dad's older brother, my Uncle Curtis, mentioned that Warren had told everyone my family couldn't come because we had, quote, a prior commitment. The lies were just stacking up. Not only had he banned us, he'd been telling his guests that we chose not to show. My dad came out onto the porch in a pressed shirt, hair combed, playing the gracious retiree, and the second he spotted me, his face did this quick flicker. He came down and leaned in close and whispered, "You came by yourself. Good. That's better for everyone." I looked him dead in the eye and said, "I'm so disappointed in you." Watched his hosting smile crack for half a second before he shoved it back on for the crowd, and that's when I made my move. I walked straight through the front door, past the little clusters of guests, over to the Bluetooth speaker playing that gentle acoustic playlist, and I unplugged it. Dead silence. Every conversation just stopped. 40 heads turned toward me at once. Then I pointed at the 65-inch TV mounted over the fireplace and told my movers, "That one comes down first." The shock hit the room like a dropped tray. You could physically feel the energy flip from celebration to confusion, to what on earth is happening. Dad rushed over, his voice already going high and thin. Grant, what do you think you're doing? This is my retirement party. I'm taking back what's mine, I told him, calm as anything. What do you mean yours? He sputtered. That's my TV. No, I said. It's mine. It's on my card. The mount is on my card. Every streaming login on it is under my name. Would you like me to pull up the receipts in front of your guests? That shut him up fast. Colton came flying in from the backyard with Nadia trailing behind him, and when he saw the movers gently lifting the TV off the wall bracket, he absolutely lost it. He got between me and the crew, arms out, yelling at me to stop. You can't do this. This is Dad's day. Step aside, Colton, I said. No, you're ruining everything, he screamed. Do you want me to call the police? I asked him, nice and even. Let them come sort out who owns what. I've got documentation for all of it. Do you? His face went pale. He knew. Nadia was standing off to the side, looking like she'd wandered onto a movie set by accident, clearly wondering what kind of family her boyfriend came from. Later, when I told Sloane about Nadia's expression during all this, she said, that poor girl showed up for finger sandwiches and got a live courtroom drama. She's already 3 chapters into rewriting her whole opinion of Colton, guaranteed. While the TV came down, the guests just stood there, uncomfortable, whispering, a few of them looking for the exit. But I was locked in. When the movers had the TV loaded on the dolly, I pointed them toward the kitchen. Fridge is next. That's when Uncle Curtis stepped in front of me, hands up, trying to play peacemaker. He asked me to slow down and explain what in the world was going on. Before I could say a word, Dad jumped in with his victim's story. How he'd made one small, reasonable request about the guest list, and now his ungrateful son was tearing his house apart out of spite. But Curtis wasn't buying it. He told my father to be quiet and let me talk. So I talked. I told that entire room about the text message. How my dad had banned my 7-year-old daughter and my wife from his retirement because my little brother didn't want them there. How they'd called Sadie too wild and Becca too blunt, and decided a child would embarrass the family in front of important guests. The silence after that was the loudest thing I've ever heard. I pulled out my phone and held up the actual text, and I watched face after face change as they read my father's cold little words for themselves. Whatever warmth those people walked in with started draining out of the room in real time. My mom's sister, my Aunt Denise, was the first to speak. Warren, she said, how could you do something like that to a little girl? Then Dad's co-worker of 20 years, a guy named Vernon, shook his head slow and said he couldn't believe the Warren he knew would lock his own grandkid out of a family party. He'd worked next to my father for 2 decades, and he set down his drink, said congratulations on the retirement, Warren, and quietly showed himself out. That one landed on my dad harder than the fridge did. Another co-worker, a woman named Priya, who Dad had always talked about like she hung the moon at the plant, looked at him and just said, I brought a gift for a man I thought I knew, and she left it on the counter still wrapped and walked out. When somebody asked Colton directly how he could possibly be okay with banning a child and her mother, he started sputtering the same excuses, that Sadie might make a scene, that he didn't want Nadia uncomfortable, that he just wanted things perfect. Perfect for who? My Aunt Denise shot back. You banned a baby so your girlfriend of 3 months would be impressed. Colton didn't have an answer for that either. I cut him off and asked the whole room point blank, would a single one of you have been embarrassed if my daughter laughed too loud or if my wife had an opinion about something? Every person there said no. One of Dad's neighbors, a woman named Marlene, actually spoke up and said she'd been looking forward to seeing Sadie all week, that little kids are the best part of a party like this. And just like that, the whole atmosphere flipped inside out. What started as shock turned into something colder, aimed squarely at my father and my brother. People started looking at the two of them like they were meeting them for the first time and not liking what they saw. A neighbor named Gordon quietly told his wife they should head out, that this wasn't a celebration anymore. It was just something sad to stand around and watch. One by one, guests started slipping toward the door, some of them stopping to squeeze my shoulder or tell me they were sorry for my family on the way out. My dad's perfect, classy evening was curdling into a public humiliation in front of everyone whose opinion he'd spent 38 years chasing. But the real turn came when Nadia stepped away from Colton with this hard look on her face. Colton, she said, loud enough for the room, this whole thing is disgusting. The way you talk about a little kid and her mom. I have 2 nieces. I would end anyone who treated them the way you're treating that little girl. She wasn't a bad person, Nadia. She could see straight through Colton's whole act. He grabbed for her arm, begging her to understand his side, but she was already done. I think we want really different things out of family, she said. She gave me a small, respectful nod, picked up her purse, and walked right out the front door. Within 15 minutes, a party of 40 had thinned down to a handful. The stragglers were gathering their jackets, ready to go. On her way out, an older neighbor named Mrs. Ruiz stopped in front of my dad and told him she was ashamed of him. That family is supposed to come before before appearances, and then she left too. And just like that, the house was empty except for my dad, Colton, my mom standing silent in the hallway, the two movers, and me. Untouched trays of food. A banner nobody was celebrating under anymore. The ghost of a party that never actually happened. Time to finish what I came to do. With the guests gone, I told the movers to keep going down the list. Everything I marked. That's when Colton tried to physically block the hallway to the master bedroom, and my dad finally turned on my mom, snarling at her, "How could you just stand there and let him rob me blind?" And that's when quiet Renata, who hadn't said a word since the guests started leaving, looked at him and said, "Ice cold. He bought all of it, Warren. He has every right to take back what he paid for. I warned you this would happen if you kept treating his family like they were nothing." For the next hour, I stood there and watched two professionals calmly, methodically empty the house I grew up visiting. The Samsung fridge rolled out first, and Dad actually reached out toward it like he was going to stop it, then thought better of it when I asked if he wanted to show the movers a receipt with his name on it instead of mine. He didn't. Then the sectional went, the one he complained about his back on until I replaced it. Then the washer. Then the microwave, the coffee maker, the dining table where I'd eaten every holiday of my life, the patio set, the good knives, the bed frame. One of the movers politely asked Dad if he could step aside so they could reach the coffee table, and my father, a man who'd just spent an hour telling the neighborhood how classy he was, stepped aside without a word. Piece by piece, room by room, the whole place hollowed out until the only sound left was the squeak of the dolly wheels on the hardwood floor. I was pretty sure I'd also paid to have refinished. My dad and my brother just stood there against the far wall, helpless, because they both knew there was nothing they could do. Colton kept starting sentences he couldn't finish. "But that's, you can't just, Dad, tell him." And Dad had nothing. For the first time in my entire life, my father had absolutely nothing to say. Every receipt, every transfer, every warranty card had my name on it. Colton kept saying over and over, "How can you do this to Dad?" While my dad cycled between screaming rage and this pitiful wounded act nobody was buying anymore. When I texted Sloane the updates, her replies kept me from losing my mind. "So Warren went from retirement party to going out of business sale in under 2 hours," she wrote. "That's a world record. Someone get this man a plaque made of my furniture." When the truck was finally loaded, the moving company manager walked over and transferred $200 into my account on the spot, their payment for the used furniture and appliances. Let that land for a second. I was getting paid to reclaim my own property from a father who just told me my daughter wasn't good enough to breathe his air. As the truck backed out of the driveway, I stopped and took one last look at the house. It stood there, hollow and echoing, just bare walls and the few worn-out things I'd never bought. My dad was sitting on the front steps, completely gutted, staring at nothing. Colton was by the door frantically texting, probably begging Nadia to come back, but I wasn't quite done. I reached into my jacket and pulled out Sadie's card, the one she'd spent a whole week on, glitter and crooked letters and all. I walked over to my father and held it out to him. "This is what Sadie made for you," I said. For one second, I honestly thought maybe seeing that innocent little card, made by a 7-year-old who loved him with her whole heart, might crack something open in him. Maybe he'd finally understand what he threw away over a guest list. Instead, he snatched it out of my hand, ripped it clean in half, and threw the pieces on the porch. "Your brat and that mouthy wife of yours ruined the biggest night of my life," he spat. "This is on them." Colton actually chimed in from the doorway. "Yeah, because of you, Nadia dumped me. I hope you're proud." Watching that card get torn apart, the one my little girl made with so much love that she wouldn't even let me help, something in my chest went sharp and quiet. But I didn't yell. I didn't lose it. I just knelt down and started picking up the pieces, one by one, off the porch. Every scrap was an hour of her time, her excitement, her love for a grandfather who just destroyed it right in front of her dad. I gathered every piece and put them in my pocket. Then I stood up, looked my father square in the eye, and said, "You are a pathetic excuse for a father and an even worse grandfather." For a second, the whole world went still. Warren and Colton both froze, like those words hit harder than anything the movers had carried out of that house. I turned and started walking to my truck without looking back, and that's when I heard my mom's voice behind me. "Wait, I'm coming with you." I turned around, and there was Renata, walking out the front door with a packed suitcase in each hand and a manila envelope tucked under her arm. She'd had them ready. She'd known exactly how this day was going to end before it started. When my dad saw his wife heading down the driveway with her bags, he shot up off the steps. "Renata, you can't just leave," he shouted. "What are you doing?" She stopped, set down one suitcase, and pulled the manila envelope out from under her arm. "Warren," she said, "you're being served. My attorney will handle the rest." She held out the papers, and his face went white as he took them. 36 years, and this this is the man you turned into, she said. I'm done. Then she picked her suitcase back up and kept walking toward my truck. At the end of the driveway, she turned around one last time and looked at both of them. You and Colton deserve each other, she said. Maybe now the two of you can finally learn what it feels like to earn something. Neither of them had a single word. Colton's mouth just hung open. When Mom reached my truck, she looked up at me, and her voice finally wavered just a little. You got room for your old lady. My throat closed up. I told her she had a room in my house for the rest of her life.